Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Political Vigilante. My name is Graham Elwood. We have a returning guest, a very special guest, who is our go-to reference for the Julian Assange trial. You can follow his work at TareqHaddad.com. Tareq, thank you so much for coming on the show today. How you doing?
Yeah, good. Good to see you again.
And we had to work the times out because you're all the way in the UK, and I'm glad you caught that. I'm glad we didn't keep you up at midnight.
That's okay. I mean, I tend to work with a lot of people in different time zones anyway, so it's kind of part and parcel of the job. It's fine.
Yeah, for sure.
I was doing it for quality control purposes. If it went past midnight, it might get a bit shaky. I don't get anything wrong about Julian or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, I think it's doing indie media, like it's a constant conundrum. I just interviewed last week Vanessa Beeley, and we had to say, like, she agreed to this time, and then I thought she was in the UK, but she was in Damascus, and so it was like 3 in the morning for her. That was kind of not bad.
Yeah.
But so I covered a couple of because you were posting every night basically on TareqHaddad.com. I was kind of going through what you were covering. So first of all, I want to just say what is the status right now and what's happening next, and then we'll get into kind of what you saw and felt while you were there.
Sure. So at this stage, we've just kind of had the 4 weeks of evidentiary part of the proceedings, which is kind of where obviously we've got slight differences between the UK and the American court system. They're very much the same. You might have different sayings for what the sort of stage of the courts are, but it's very precisely the same system. So we've just had all the evidence round, and now that all of that stuff is kind of there on the record. So we've had sort of, I think, upwards of 40 witness statements that are now sort of on the official record in the legal files. From all sorts of human rights people, investigative journalists, people that were very involved with the sort of ins and outs of WikiLeaks during sort of very significant periods of time. So we're talking about like when things like the Iraq war logs got released and the Afghan war logs. So certain people were there kind of as first-hand witnesses to those events kind of being leveled in the US allegations regarding redactions and things like that. So we had people kind of very in depth discussing the redaction process, and people that have followed this case, it's something that's very well known about WikiLeaks, about actually how careful they were with the redaction process and how it was more censorious than the Department of Defense, even when the same documents were released. So yeah, we had kind of this sort of mammoth 4 weeks, which was, a bit of a nightmare to try and cover because, as you sort of mentioned, I had the intention of trying to publish a news story every night, but it was just such sort of, as was expected, to be fair. I knew that I wouldn't really do one every night. That was sort of the goal. But, some days we had sort of 9, 10 witness statements, and 7 or 8 of them could be, for me, I have to sort of edit what I decide to write about. And I think it was the same for everyone that was covering it. But what was nice to see, it was all the indie media helping each other out, and even sort of kind of traditional, mainstream media. There, lots of people were sort of either on the video conferencing or actually in the courtroom. And there's a lot of stuff kind of going on behind the scenes of people, helping each other to get witness statements and things like that, because it's all these things took a lot of work to get them out into the public, for example. So certain witness statements that people have been asking for, and it's, certain activists and so on will kind of demand to see or they're hoping to get hold of sort of the psychiatry witness statements or some of the medical experts that gave evidence. But obviously, you have to be kind of very tuned into these 4 weeks of proceedings, because in about a crucial 15-minute segment, we had judges ruling on the psychiatrist's reports, because both the prosecution and the defense didn't want those to be released to the public. So, there's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes, but yeah, I mean, kind of crazy for weeks personally, and then I had sort of mid-week 3, I had a bit of a crash, and I had to sort of sleep for 2 days of the proceedings, and that was sort of actually some key moments happened from the psychiatry perspective and with the medical experts. But thankfully I could sort of rely on other people that I knew were in the court or were either covering it online. That okay, at least I know that they were covering it, and I could sort of get a reliable feed from them. We had people like Kevin Gostola, Mohammed El-Mazi, Joe Lauria, I believe, was from Consortium News, was covering it. And then, despite it's kind of maybe going to turn into a therapy session of my grumblings, but like I kind of sometimes dislike the narrative that the mainstream media didn't cover the trial of the hearings of Julian Assange. The media were there, and you might have not seen every single story because, we live in this sort of information craze at the moment, but there were a decent amount of news stories produced every on the major topics, and most of them were quite accurate, bar a few exceptions obviously and sort of omissions. But on the whole, I would say the media coverage was critical and in favor of Julian Assange. Well, not the journalist being sort of openly biased, but it's when you read the news pieces, it was Julian Assange sort of came out as the sort of the person that we know him to be, essentially, of how he was careful with his sources, of all of the things that WikiLeaks released into the public, and kind of we had a lot of people that spoke about the impact that WikiLeaks had. Several people from Reprieve, but Reprieve is, I think we might have talked about this last time actually, about Reprieve is the organization that deals a lot with Guantanamo Bay detainees and securing them rights. So we had a lot of people saying that, without WikiLeaks, those, a lot of those people could still be in Guantanamo Bay. I believe the numbers of, still, they were floating around 800 for, decades almost, 15, 20 years, people would go without trial held at Guantanamo Bay. And then, thanks to this charity Reprieve, I believe the current number's around 50. And obviously there was many pieces that kind of has gone into that, but Reprieve has done most of the litigation for those Guantanamo, prisoners. People like Clive Stafford Smith and Eric Lewis in the US. So lots of things like that. I could probably ramble on for another hour or so. But
well, I mean, this is intriguing because this was a month long. I mean, in what was it, January or February? It was like 2 weeks or something like that. This was a month, and if I understood correctly, similar to the American legal system, this was sort of the discovery of and both or either side wanting certain evidence in and not in, and the judge sort of determining which evidence made it and which didn't. And some of the early stuff that I read from you that first week was like, once again, not that this is shocking for any of us, but it really kind of, went into this absurd kangaroo court-esque. It really feels like that the judge was, really, obviously, I have a hard time believing this judge isn't contacted by somebody in UK intelligence or the American intelligence straightforward, just saying, hey, we need this to kind of go a certain way or something like that. I mean, because the whole this whole thing is absurd. I mean, especially in America, we just had everybody, all these liberals just doing high fives because the New York Times got access to Trump's taxes, right? Okay, great. He shouldn't keep that hidden. And I was like, well, how is that any different that they're just publishing? I mean, it just comes back to the same thing. They're just publishing. But and it's nice to hear that the indie media, you guys were all working together, and the corporate media says, oh, you indie media people are biased. Well, it's like, no, we're you should be more biased, CNN and Fox, because if Julian Assange gets taken down, we all can be taken down. But I want to focus on, obviously it's a month, and I'm sure you would, like you said, you had to take a couple of days. It's just overwhelming when they're having 7, 8, 9 witnesses speak and determining which are the most critical. What did you see in terms of how Julian was treated, how the court treated it, the prosecution, sort of over this 3-4 week period, from like the tactics and some wins and losses, as obviously each day as they're trying to kind of move the ball down the field, so to speak. What specific things stood out to you in that regard?
Yeah. And I've sort of been running into this with a few people, because obviously I speak to people about the Assange case kind of all the time, and outside the court I meet a lot of the activists, and I speak to other journalists about this, and this is kind of an attitude that I kind of keep running up against, and I've even kind of got into quite heated debates with some close people, friends of Julian Assange, and people we're both absolutely on the same sort of side of the ball. But for me, I really dislike the narrative that it was a kangaroo court. And I'm sort of not picking on anyone when I say that, but from my perspective, because I very much went in with the mentality of, okay, my job is to be a journalist. 2020 has been sort of this wild roller coaster of a year, and it kind of shows you that, something we all know as journalists, that if you ever try to predict the future, you're going to look like an idiot. Regardless of what it is, regardless of political bias, because we all have it, and journalists have it too. And so my job was to go into the court, be an observer, try and document as much as possible. My experience with the court is that there were difficulties that and I'm saying all these things because I understand that perspective that people say of the kangaroo court, because so many decisions have gone against Julian in the past, and there's been, and there's obviously countless breaches of sort of human rights expectations and legal, even just legal procedure that's sort of part and parcel of the British justice system. I will get into all of those. There's plenty of,
Sure.
criminality and things to discuss. But in terms of, the actual court process, the staff, the court staff were very helpful in terms of, there was problems with the videos for video, but, behind the scenes, there was a full-time team that was dedicated to making sure that all the journalists, indie media or, mainstream, they treated everyone the same, that everyone was sort of, they were helping people get into these video rooms just like we're sort of using now, except they had sort of 3 separate ones going with at least 20 journalists each, which wasn't, that's not an easy undertaking. And that's, on the priority list of what the court has to do. They were doing the same thing just for witnesses, because the witnesses were all over the world. We had witnesses in New Zealand, such as Nikki Hager, who's an investigative journalist, a lot of attorneys from the United States that were talking about the prison conditions that he might be facing. Some of these people were investigative journalists in Germany or, Italy, things like that, or, the UK itself. With COVID, it's not many people were traveling to the courts. It was, a limited courtroom. I think we only had the medical experts that are all based in London, and Clive Stafford Smith is one other that actually gave testimony in court. So that was a big undertaking. And in terms of the judge and all of those, what she has to ensure for a courtroom to be a proper proceedings, things like the public gallery or the journalists that are observing via video link, it's not on her top priority when she has a team of people there. And her job is to make sure that the witnesses are all being presented, and they've got this sort of big scheduling problem that they had of, I'm sure people saw on Twitter that there was a lot of uncertainty about which witness was coming on next, and they would chop and change, and the list would change. And in the end, actually, we sort of had this negotiation between the prosecution and defense about, certain witnesses that had to go, which also, revealed a lot of interesting things. But a lot of those statements in the end just had to be sort of read into the record or just submitted, electronically, without actually.
So I'm sorry to interrupt, but were you allowed in the physical courtroom or no because of COVID?
So I assumed that the sort of media coverage would be so much that I wouldn't get access. Because I made it. There was also a big process behind the scenes to actually get access to the video platform. So when I was sort of going through the whole process, I said my preference is to be inside the courtroom, but if that's not possible, I'd like obviously the video access, and I was granted the video access without any problems. And because I'm watching the court day in, day out for 2 weeks, and I was having my own technical issues that was nothing to do with the court. It was just, one day a housemate is streaming Netflix for 3 hours, and I'm, trying to watch it's, just kind of everyone's dealing with these things of work, the issues of working from home and things of that nature. But that's essentially what all these journalists were doing. And I was having technical issues, and I also could see that the court was half empty, because sometimes the camera would go to the room that all the journalists were in the neighboring room. So kind of third week, I kind of just made a decision of, I'm going to make sure I get into the building. I've got all my journalist accreditation. There's no reason why I can't be inside the building. There's a few problems with security guards, etc., and not recognizing my press pass, and there was a list. But eventually I phoned the right people, and I managed to ask politely and do all those sort of things that you have to do to finally get in. And then I missed about 2-3 hours when that happened, and it was a very frustrating morning. But I just had to be, this is out of my control. I have to play the game just to get inside. And once I was inside, I was actually fortunate enough to not only be in the, I observed some sessions from the annex, it's kind of the court next room, next door, but for the Friday of the third week and the whole final week, I was actually in the courtroom as the only journalist, like observing the proceedings with the lawyers and Julian Assange and everyone there. So that was a privilege, obviously, as a career thing, but obviously now I kind of feel that sense of duty and pressure about kind of getting sort of that real story out there and kind of making sure the record's 100% accurate about these issues, because obviously I advocate for his freedom and to be treated justly by the courts. And my perspective is that, okay, I understand the history of this case, hopefully as well as anyone else. Let's wait till January 4th, and then we can make our judgment based on District Judge Vanessa Brace's decision, just like the lawyers will be doing. They'll get handed down the ruling, and they'll decide, okay, what are we doing next with this? Do we have to go to the appeals courts, or if the decision goes in the favor of Julian Assange, there might be a US appeal that goes to those courts, and the legal process will not be stopping there. So, and then the lawyers for Julian Assange might decide to, there'll be a legal process just to get Julian out of prison. It's not just, he has to apply for bail, and it depends on the nature of the decision. But we'll have to wait and see. There's still a lot of unknowns.
So, just to clarify for the audience, so we're now waiting until January 4th is when the judge is going to actually make a ruling.
Mm-hmm.
And the potential rulings are what specifically?
So I think it's very binary. It's either no extradition or extradition. So it's kind of, we have the evidence, we won't have that part of the proceedings again. So even in the Supreme Courts or the higher courts, the European Courts of Justice, it will be hard to bring new evidence, sort of substantive evidence, into the case now. For new evidence to be brought in, it has to be, to materially have affected the case, not just something that's happened since, or some it has to be really sort of significant to the actual initial case. It's not, you know, and people have seen this sort of in documentaries, and so it's usually, for that kind of thing to happen, it's years and years down the line when some sort of new technology is invented for DNA or something. It's not something that happens that regularly. So it's, yeah, so now it's the real sort of the decision, and then whether it goes up to higher courts or not, because we're still at the sort of at the lowest rung of the British court system.
So like you said, either side could appeal based on this ruling, and then so explain the specifics of to maybe an American audience that. So it's just one judge going through this month's worth of evidence to come up with a decision by January 4th?
That is my understanding of the case. Whether, because I know that certain other people that sort of track this, there's other magistrates involved that are sort of have stepped away. I know that they still obviously perform a function, such as the lady judge. I forget how to pronounce her name properly, but it's like Arbuthnot. So yeah, there's things like that. But I think in terms of this decision, it's going to be made by District Judge Barreza. Obviously, and there's other things to consider. You know, she has a reputation of having a 96% extradition rate. But again, there's kind of systemic reasons why that percentage is so high, because obviously the UK, historically, all the people that we've extradited to the United States have been, a lot of those Guantanamo detainees have come through the UK. It's like MI6 has picked them up in Syria and then they've sent them off to Guantanamo Bay or another CIA black site or wherever, you know. We're sort of partners in crime in this big game of corruption. So, well, not, you know, it was just war crimes, I should say, not corruption. And again, this was the most interesting thing for me as a journalist observing these proceedings, because I tried to have that mentality of, okay, I don't want to go in with the mindset that it's a kangaroo court. I want to be open-minded to all things, and I'm just here to observe. But it kind of, in the third week, there was this very interesting shift where it was obviously starts off with Julian Assange in the glass dock, and he's all these allegations are being faced to him. But in the third week, there was this kind of interesting change where we had so much talk about CIA black sites and the prison conditions in the United States that, you know, I know I'm largely speaking to a US audience, but it was sort of a political embarrassment to have this court case in the middle of London, because this is the Central Criminal Court of London. It's a very historic courtroom. You know, it's the reason that it was moved to this courtroom was that it's got the best media facilities during COVID. The judge was actually being helpful there. She was trying to help the media get better access. And this is the thing, we've got a long history of, you know, protecting the rights of journalists, even though in this particular instance, it's not the case, because it's obviously such a landmark figure that's revolutionized the complete state of journalism. He's put together this library of, you know, cables and all these things that no one's ever done before. Even in like the history of the New York Times or whatever, you would not find such a, well, actually, that's maybe an over exaggeration, but there's some comparable data leaks, but as a collective, there's nothing ever been like it.
Yeah, it is. What he's done is you know, innovative, and just from a technological standpoint, not to mention the stories that he's covered. But I want to get some clarity on this. So you went in, and I give you credit for going in saying I'm going to be open-minded and not just say this is a kangaroo court. I wouldn't have been able to do that, but you know, hats off. So you said by the third week, when all this stuff kind of came out, stuff that maybe us and our people in our world already know about, but maybe mainstream people don't know about, all of the CIA black sites and how kind of, you know, we just snatch people up, you know, the United States. We like to think we're this big beacon of democracy, and only totalitarian countries like North Korea do this, but here we are. We do this and have been doing this at least for the better part of 19 years in our global war on terror. which is just a waste of trillions of dollars. So when that came out in week 3 in this significant courthouse, Old Bailey, what effect do you think that had on, I mean, do you think it was significant in terms of maybe changing the tide of at least people in the UK going, well, maybe, because the propaganda machine to paint Julian Assange as the whatever, you know, he's tied in with Russia or he's a treason or whatever they've tried to pin him on. Do you think that event or those events in the week 3, as you said, helped sort of turn the tide a little bit, or at least helped his case, or at least helped his case in the court of public opinion?
I think so, absolutely, because this is the thing, it was the nature of the US allegations are so weak, and they're based on essentially a lie. You know, it's like to accuse someone of something and it's going up to this very adversarial court process where it's getting tested. You know, so the US allegations are getting tested for how strong they are. Essentially, this is what's going on. And as we had day after day after day after day of this repeating themes of, you know, not just the good that Julian did and things of that nature, but it was the repetition of things of how careful the redaction process was. We heard that over and over and over again, kind of as a constant theme of numerous people. Things like the Chelsea Manning video, sort of by the 4th week when that was coming up, it was kind of the lawyers had to almost apologize for bringing it up again, because it just, but just kind of, it's a very polite system of, you know, when the lawyers talk to each other, it's my learned friend and my, you know, my esteemed colleague and that name, you know, it's that kind of very British. And lady, yes, and I apologize, but, you know, yet again, the evidence brings us to this hugely significant video that showed this Apache helicopter. It's well, you know, it's Nikki Hager made the point that it's as iconic as the George Floyd video, and the impact that had on the, you know, the way that the global war on terror is viewed worldwide. It's very comparable, and I think, you know, there was this very kind of key dialogue actually with James Lewis QC, who's leading the prosecution, who's kind of this high court judge in the UK, and he's kind of a very significant prosecutor, but represents the US government in this case. When we were having these negotiations about, we had to limit the number of witnesses, and they were trying to say certain witnesses shouldn't be allowed to, or their statements shouldn't be allowed to be submitted or for them to present, because obviously it was such a rushed court proceedings that the defense was trying to squeeze in witnesses in the last day, and new witness statements and sort of new affidavits and things of that nature to kind of put it in US terms. So certain, for example, like in the medical testimony, for example, they refer to a kind of speech that Julian gave, or a conversation at the Frontline Club. And that was sort of posed to one of the medical experts, very selectively using quotes about Assange hurting informants. But that was put to one of the medical experts without the proper context for it. So on the final day, the defense tried to produce just a kind of a report of that was the transcript of that speech, just so it's on the record in case it becomes relevant later. Because, like I said, if it goes up to the Supreme Court or European Court of Human Rights, it's nice to have that document on the record so that the defense can say, look, the prosecution were being selective with their quotes and they put it out of context. This is the full speech that he gave, and it actually shows a bit more nuance about how he is careful with his sources. Because, you know, it's proof, but district judge did not allow this particular evidence statement in. But again, I don't particularly view that as any sort of maliciousness. It was sort of submitted on the last day, and the prosecution made an argument that you can't just be submitting evidence like this, kind of literally we're about to finish in 2 hours, but I've still published that document anyway because it's a transcript of a public event it's on YouTube. So there's nothing stopping me as a journalist because I know what event they're referring to. I've published that transcript myself on my website, and it's clear what it's referring to. And there's other documents I have in my possession that I know that the judge has said this is not going to be evidence in the courtroom, but because it's a public statement, I can publish it and say this is the document. So I know what those documents are, and I've got obviously a kind of a record of all those things. And one of the things that I've done, which I think is quite significant for people that haven't seen the update, hopefully they have, I've put a full archive of the witness statements available on my website. So
well,
that's obviously a great resource for people that want to investigate it further and research it for the future, because I was kind of looking through them today in the last few days. There's about 1,500 pages of evidence there. So, it's like, don't underestimate these documents. And I mean, I've been literally every day since the court proceedings finished, I've been investigating kind of quite a major story purely from the witness statements. And I'm so proper investigative journalists out there that are listening, or indie media journalists, I recommend you absolutely to read the witness statements and actually do a proper investigation of some of the things that are mentioned there. It's an absolute goldmine of things, especially regarding the spying. That's the kind of the aspect that I'm looking into at the moment.
Is the spying on Julian?
So we obviously know a lot about the UC Global stuff that I'm assuming you and your audience are kind of quite familiar with that landscape, but then there's the other aspect of there was the complete seizure of all of his legal documents, which we also discovered on the last day. So it's literally, I don't know the exact number of pages, but it's literally bundles and bundles of legal documents and all of his. So essentially I have it as gossip. I don't have this confirmed as true, but I think Julian was planning to write a book on his own life, and because he was upset with a lot of the other books that people had written about him, including the one from the Guardian journalists that published the password with all the information about the cables, but also it was to prepare his legal defense. And obviously we now have evidence. Kevin Gustoll has written a good story about this as well, about how the FBI in the UK were involved in, and we have certain private security companies, not just UC Global, that were involved, and Ecuadorian officials that were involved in taking all of these documents and handing it over to the FBI in the UK. And also there was, it's all in those witness statements. So I'm kind of trying to fact check some of those and try and get additional information to try and kind of piece together a more thorough investigation of maybe new evidence that's not in those witness statements.
Is there anything that stood out to you that, since you went in with an open mind, is there anything that stood out to you that was like, yes, like they were running a scam, or it felt like, this isn't right, or they're abusing justice just because they want to get this guy?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there were clearly some decisions that went against Julian, but I think it's a matter of proportionality and fairness, I think. So the judge, her job is to just kind of make sure that the proceedings continue, that they are heard, that's, that they proceed. That's why they call them proceedings. Her job is to make sure that the courtroom proceedings, the evidence is heard, both the judges make their cases and all that sort of thing. So in terms of that perspective, there wasn't any sort of foul play that I suspected. And I've covered courtrooms, like, professionally as a journalist, like a decent amount. This is not, so I kind of understand the sort of dynamics of the courtroom, and so I kind of would like to think that if I did see some sort of element of foul play, I would be able to to identify it. There was one occasion where might have happened more than one occasion, but only the time that I saw it. was a document appeared to be pre-prepared in terms of what the district judge was going to say, and then we had our kind of legal arguments, and then she read what was going to be written on the piece of paper, regardless of the arguments that were made. But I kind of possibly rationalized that post facto, because I kind of noticed that she tends to be typing a lot during these proceedings, and I think the way that she works is that she likes to write out every ruling that she has to give, because she still has to submit that in a sort of legal document anyway. So every time that she makes a key decision, she has it prepared as a document. So I don't, on that particular instant, I felt like it was unfair, and it very well might be, but I don't know if she's doing that as like a consistent thing, and so I don't know these things. So for me, I don't try to guess it. So for me, it's I will judge her for how she has judged the case when the ruling is handed down, and then we as journalists will be able to get actually not just hopefully we'll have a full transcript of word for what she said. But if it's not made, I will be taking a transcription of it for myself, for my notes. That should be sort of the way that I was trained as a journalist, your shorthand transcription can be used as evidence in a courtroom, and that you are guilty of prosecution if my shorthand evidence, if my shorthand notes are, if I've misquoted someone or something, journalists can go to prison, and they have done in the United Kingdom with we've had journalists hacking the phones of people. If people are on, I believe it's on Netflix, or the shows about the Murdochs and the news, the News of the World, and the Sun, they were infamously hacking the phones of numerous people. So,
okay, but so before we go, after having watched all this, and now you're pouring through the 1,500 documents of witness statements, which, as you said, and I encourage the audience to go to your website, tareqhaddad.com. I'll put it in the chat and in the show notes to really go through that. Maybe you don't want to get into predictions, but what are you seeing? What do you think? How do you think this is going to go?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I think I'm going to leave it at that. Sorry to. I see myself foremost as a journalist. Hopefully, and so I haven't shied away from commenting on foreign affairs or my feeling of sort of geopolitical events in the past, but I tried to kind of do it with a measure of my understanding of the real world, and not just because I understand what I'm saying is not the sort of mainstream Assange view of this is that this is unjust court proceedings. I 100% sympathize with that, and I share that mentality. We have to remember that every single day that all of us are going to work or doing our daily bits and bobs, that Julian Assange is in Belmarsh, and even just one, one rainy day can, can have a severe impact on his mental health just because he's in isolation. We heard, very, very distressing and difficult to listen to evidence about his mental condition, about how he was calling Samaritans, which is a suicide helpline. He was calling it multiple times a day, usually at night time. You heard stories about how he was sort of couldn't get to bed in the middle. He's just sort of lying in the fetal position in the middle of his cell, and needing to call Samaritans. And he was found with a blade, unfortunately, but that was something that was confirmed. He was, you know, as a journalist, you're not supposed to discuss potential methods of suicide, but because it could encourage other people. And, you know, we talked a lot about sort of suicidal ideation, and I'm someone that's very interested in psychology and psychoanalysis. So I have a sort of, I'd like to think, a fairly sophisticated understanding of these things. And it was still extremely difficult to listen to. So, you know, we have to remember that. So that's my perspective of it. That's where my motivation and my anger comes from. But it doesn't come from calling the court system, which I understand is flawed, but my anger doesn't come from calling it a kangaroo court. My last vestige of hope in this case is that the court system and the legal process will do what they're supposed to do. If Assange is extradited and goes to the United States, with the way that it currently is going in the United States, I would not, you know, in terms of the SAMS conditions, and, you know, I don't know if you've seen any of those pictures of the cell that Assange would be forced to spend the rest of his life in. It's absolute misery. And yeah, those are the things that I think give me a lot of purpose in what I do, in terms of why I try to report on this case to the best of my abilities. But I just try not to. I just try to be as accurate as possible, and sometimes it can come into conflict with people that disagree with it. But hopefully, I think I try to put that in a perspective that makes those people understand, rather than like a confrontational sort of mentality with it. It's not that I'm, you know, it's not this divisive thing that we have, I think, hopefully, where I disagree with you, you must be either a left-wing communist or a right-wing bigot. You know, it's hopefully that, you know, I think me and you, Graham, we've talked several times now, and obviously we both understand that we're coming at this from the same place. And, you know, I feel that comfort that to be able to discuss these things openly, and hopefully with your listeners and viewers, I'm sure are just as intelligent about these ideas as anyone else. So.
No, I applaud that stance of, like, because it is so horrific how they're treating him. He has, you know, I mean, solitary is not good for the way they're treating him. That he is, you know, called the suicide hotline, and it's awful that your approach is to give the last hope to this trial, because, like, I don't want to be right that this is a kangaroo court and they're going to extradite him. I don't want to be right. I want him to to be free. I mean, that's what I want.
My particular view is that this particular courtroom will be much better than the Eastern District Court of Virginia.
Yeah,
and that's a fact for me. If you think this was a kangaroo court, then wait till you see that one.
Oh yeah, I mean, if it comes to the U.S. for.
That's my perspective. You know, I guess everything is relative. So, yes, obviously this is an unjust prosecution, and it's gone on for far too long. You know, it's, I think, approaching, or maybe has even, you know, past 10 years. That, well, I think we've just been very close to the 10-year anniversary of the Chelsea Manning disclosures. So it's, you know, it was sort of in this ballpark time, and it was actually, you know, just to think back to it, just because it's I've been looking at some more documents, researching today. You know, it was this time 4 years ago that we had the 2016 election and all the sort of drama that we had, and you know, there's all sorts of things. So again, it shows you that history is kind of a crazy, turbulent thing, and you know, we don't know actually, you know, how to look back at this particular moment that we're in right now. I think it's best to kind of, you know, collect the information and then try and analyze it with a you know, a kind of clear-headed way of thinking. But
yeah, there's not a lot of clear-headed thinking in the United States. I'll tell you that right now. So.
I'd say the same thing. I guess my maybe piece of advice to people is that, because it's election time in the US, I think it's less than 2 weeks. You know, be careful when you're reading something that is making predictions about who's going to win the presidential election based on, doesn't matter if it's Gallup or it doesn't matter if it's NBC or the New York Times or whoever. Like, I don't think it's anyone's guess, even though I have my ideas. But I genuinely don't think it's, and I'm someone that, you know, I'd like to think that I have a fairly good understanding of US politics and I follow it quite closely. I've written about several US elections, and I think this one is just like, it's not even, despite, you know, there are some gut feelings that I have, which we don't need to get into, but that would be a case of prediction. But I think for everyone, it's just, you know, you go out and vote and then you go watch the TV like everyone else and just find out and hope that the process works. You've done it enough times. That's the only thing I'll tell you, is that you've done it successfully, even though a few mishaps here and there. And there's obviously, this is something that's been in the election cycle as well, of potential voter fraud and, you know, those kind of issues. But from my perspective, every political issue that I see in the United States is actually, like, the root cause of them is entirely the same, and then you just have a lot of angry, divisive people on either end shouting in the opposite direction. But I mean, there are encouraging signs. I think, you know, people like Eric Weinstein, I think, who they're not going to get elected unless sort of Kanye does some sort of miracle. But Unity, they kind of started this initiative called Unity 2020, and it's very interesting about having this sort of non-divisive politics. And I think, you know, I haven't followed it too closely, but they've kind of ended up with sort of their preferred candidates of people that would be willing to engage in politics in a non-divisive way. And I think they ended up with this voting system that chose Tulsi Gabbard as their top choice, and one Republican, because the way it works is that sort of, you know, one of both sides, and they kind of supposed to cooperate on major policy decisions as opposed to being so kind of squarely against each other. But I don't think that's going to kind of be effective, but it's hopefully just a seed of the kind of ideas that are possible in American politics.
Yeah, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard just introduced a couple of, you know, resolutions to pardon Assange and Edward Snowden, which it'd be great to see. Well, all right, Tareq, I guess we'll check back in with you in January, unless, of course, you uncover something while you're going over more of these witness statements that you think we should discuss. By all means, hit me up, because you're always welcome to come on the show, man. Appreciate your work, and I hope you're not too burnt out from the last month.
Okay, thank you, and sorry for rambling a little bit, but I had a lot to get off my chest. It's a big discuss. This trial is a big issue, and it's a huge one. And as we sit here and watch the United States collapse into a civil war, I hope the British court system comes up on the right side. So thanks for all your help. And again, everybody, please go to his website, tareqhaddad.com. You can see articles and all this info. Tell everybody what's available at your website. So you have all my news coverage from the proceedings. So it should kind of, I mean, the way that I try to write my news is the way I've kind of just approached this conversation, of I try to write it non-politically affiliated or swung in any direction, of sort of like wire copy of just sort of straight down the middle, but as factual as possible about the circumstances. And then all the witness statements, and then sort of hopefully some other resources more in time with things like photos I've taken outside of the court. So I've tried to take pictures of certain lawyers from both sides, and so they're named if people kind of want to use any pictures or anything like that. Even my news stories. So I mean, part of the way I'm trying to support myself is actually trying to either republish my news stories. So, you know, other editors can republish the things that I write from court, or the photos that I take, and from the investigation. So if anyone wants to use any of those, please have a look and get in contact with me if you want to use something. But there's obviously a lot of free stuff that's on there. That's witness statements. That's kind of public record documents that I'm not selling that. That's for the public, and it should always be, obviously.
All right. Well, cool. Well, thanks, Tareq. I appreciate the time that you're putting in, and we will talk to you again soon.
Thank you very much.
All right. Go to tareqhaddad.com, everybody. So that was the show. That was it was, I give him full credit for like going in there and trying to be as unbiased as possible. It's kind of sounded like actual journalism. It's kind of weird. I'm not used to that. So thanks for supporting our show and support what Tareq does. He's an indie journalist. He needs support just like we all do. Of course, you can support this show at patreon.com/Graham Elwood or rockfin.com/Graham Elwood, blockchain cryptocurrency platform. I do a members live stream every Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific. All my content is up at Rockfin. There's even some exclusive content that I put on Rockfin because YouTube will deplatform me. And GrahamElwood.com. We have a PayPal button. Graham-Elwood is the Venmo. Thanks for watching, everybody. You're making Gotham great again. Boom!